Hello, I'm Dr. Bill Spady, and I'd like to share with you a little background and the essence of the work I've been doing over the last few decades on leadership and leadership development. As many of you know, I was very active in the outcome-based education movement and the educational change movement in the United States and North America a few decades ago. What I realized and my colleagues realized is that we had undertaken an enormous challenge of changing education. That the reforms we were seeking, the changes we were seeking, the elevation of teaching practice, of how schools would be organized and function, all required an enormous amount of change. What we also realized is that no real change, no lasting change, no deep change could happen without significant leadership. So some of us put our time and attention in on the educational side of that picture. Others of us focused very strongly on leadership and leadership development. And I was proud to join my colleague Charles Schwann in pursuing the leadership side of things because he was a serious student of the business literature on leadership, other organizational literature on leadership. He read everything he could read. He was referring me to book after book after book about leadership. And finally, one day he called and said, I think I've exhausted the well. I mean, we've gone deep and there doesn't seem to be anything here that is new. That most of these people, regardless of who the guru was, they all seem to be saying the same kinds of things now, slightly different words, but conceptually it's the same stuff. I think it's time for us to try to pull this together. So we did, and we looked at every possible aspect of leadership, the ways in which it was represented, coalesced among different groups of people, and all of a sudden a model fell into place. That model was based on one fundamental assumption, and that is that leaders lead change. The reason they're leading is to do something different. They're taking their people someplace they haven't been before, someplace that's unfamiliar to them, and they need to make that pathway to that new thing something that is accessible, real, and compelling to people. They have to want to go there. Not many people want change. They all say they do, but when the time comes, what they're really hoping is somebody else changes rather than them. So we were faced with this incredible challenge. How do we get outcome-based education or any other kind of school innovation to happen, which represents real change without really paying attention to the change process itself? Bang! All of a sudden, this framework that we called the total leader model fell into place. And it fell into place because we recognized there were 5 different schools of thought about leadership. There were, and we ended up naming them, the authentic leader, the visionary leader, the relational leader, the quality leader, and the service leader. There were large numbers of leadership experts who identified with each of those 5 different labels. The only issue was they thought that theirs was the best way to do leadership. So we had the authentic people saying, we're the way, and the visionary people saying, we're the way, and the relational people saying, we're the way, and what Chuck and I realized is they're all critical. They're absolutely all critical. They need to be brought together in some kind of way. What we realized at the same time is that each one of them, their fundamental character and purpose was to establish or create a basic foundational element that would make change be successful and lasting. Okay? So the authentic leader had a role, the visionary leader had a role, the relational leader had a role, the quality leader had a role, and the service leader had a role. They all helped to establish what we called a critical pillar of change. And we realized if any of those pillars was weak, if any of those pillars cracked and fell down, the whole change edifice would fall down. So the total leader became necessary, not necessarily embodied in one person, but certainly within a leadership team. All of the strengths of the total leader model needed to be represented. So the functional abilities, the strategies used, how they function, how they work, what they do are all represented in a fun, reader-friendly kind of condensed form in this original Total Leader book. It came out in 1998. And in fact, it came out at the National Convention of the American Association of School Administrators, because they had commissioned us to put this book together. At that national convention, Chuck and I were doing a workshop. We had to go down to the loading dock to get the cartons of these books because they had just come from the publisher. You could literally say the ink was wet. In that workshop, we already began to realize some new implications, some new possibilities for this model beyond what we had been able to describe in the book itself. The summary, bottom line, is that we had identified a process which we called strategic design. And it's the carrying out of that strategic design process, all its basic elements, that would make any kind of change effort in any kind of organization possible. So as we were laying this out, all these new insights began to come, and the problem was, in a certain way for us conceptually, the book became out of date the day we opened the book, the first group of people that ever worked with us in a workshop. Bottom line, 11 years later, the American Association of School Administrators called and said, this book is still selling like hotcakes. Okay? Don't you think it's time for an update? We said, well, not only is it an update, but we have really been thinking about and working with this model extensively for the last decade. This is going to be a significant rewrite. They said, fine. So what we produced and was published in 2010 is Total Leaders 2.0. And by that time, we had had the opportunity of testing this model a number of places. Very inspiring and enriching experiences had come out of it. And we realized 2 or 3 things, and I just want to point those out. Number one, total leaders were also total professionals. And we realized that the fundamental character of the authentic, visionary, etc. leader also had fundamental characteristics that you would say, wow, there is a real professional. So the total leader was a total professional, was a total leader, was a total professional. That is one major insight that came to us. So we built the criteria of total professional into this model. What also happened is that in my case, I had a very deep revelation about the connection between being a total leader and a total learner and living life in a total way back in 1998 after the original book had come out. And I refined and refined and refined that part of the framework, and it turned into a framework that has become the basis of incredible leadership work, organizational change work, educational work, learner outcome work, it's just been incredible. We call it the 5 C's. So in this new version of the book, this latest version, all kinds of new information, new perspectives, but the model itself, the fundamental total leader model, got deeper and deeper and richer, and its implications became broader and broader. I certainly hope, if you're interested in leadership and really believe, like we did, leaders lead change, that you're going to want to get a copy of the updated version of the book, Total Leaders 2.0. We're ready to do leadership training, leadership development, and consulting around the fundamental model here, and hope we can make that connection with you. Thank you.